Hello and welcome to Mirror Talk Podcast. Your moment of greatness starts now. Today, I am super excited to be speaking with a Middle Eastern American couple. Dr. Sheila Modir is a pediatric psychologist at a children's hospital, and her husband, Jeffrey Kashou, is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a manager of clinical product and service design for a mental health tech company. They wrote a book titled The Proudest Color to help parents and caregivers immerse their children in learning how to counteract negative and harmful messages of discrimination. Welcome to the show, lovely people. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here today and to be able to talk about this important topic.
Yes,
we're both very excited. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Mirror Talk Podcast. I'm super excited to learn from you, to know more about you. I'm really excited to learn more about your individual stories also. Can you tell me about yourselves? How has the journey been, coming from Iran and Palestine and, studying and excelling in the United States? How has that been like for you?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Illinois, which is a state in the U.S. in a pretty small town. Primarily, the population is composed of white Caucasian individuals. Mm. So I was one of the few Middle Easterners in that town. So I grew up there, and when I was around 16, we moved to California. But both of my parents are immigrants from Iran, so they started, school and work here. They immigrated at different ages in their life. So they had to start over a lot of parts of their life once they came here, but they wanted to have, like many immigrant stories that we've heard, have a better future for their children. Yeah. So they came here and started roots here. And then eventually after Illinois, we moved to California, and I've been in California ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California. My dad's family are immigrants, including my father, from Palestine. And, they kind of the typical immigrant story started in the Midwest and, just kind of scraped together what they could, made their way to California and built a family and a life out here with a larger extended family. Growing up, I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood and went to school with mostly Caucasian students, and really hadn't been very aware of my culture and ethnicity until actually 9/11 happened. And my high school has, not a lot of Middle Easterners in it. And so when 9/11 happened, when I was in high school, there was just a lot of statements, very prejudiced, racist statements. I even had one of my teachers say on 9/11, she turned the TV off and said, what should we do with all those people over there? Should we just nuke them or go to war with them, or what should we do? So it's kind of at that point that I really recognized sort of the differences that were there and the importance of honoring and recognizing my cultural background.
Yes. For both of you, how was it growing up in a Caucasian dominant, society? How did you manage that? Leaving your home where you're Iranian or Palestinian and parents and family and moving out into a community that is, just Caucasian dominant. How was that like? How was that switch and mixture for you every day?
I think it was actually a little bit of the opposite for me personally, because I grew up in the Caucasian community, but you're right. I would go home. My home was a very Middle Eastern home. Mm-hmm. But then when I moved to California, it was much more Middle Eastern dominant. So in California, there's a lot more diversity. Mm-hmm. So it was such a big shift for me to be in a state, or at least in Southern California, where there's a large acceptance of the Middle Eastern culture. I remember growing up in the Midwest, there were times that I would, especially post 9/11, right? I would pretend to be Greek or Italian and pass as another culture that was more socially accepted and wasn't as heavily discriminated against, because I didn't want to stand out so much. So there were times where I really struggled with my own racial identity and had to really come to terms and understand it better. And then when we moved to California, there was this sudden shift of it's celebrated and people know about it, and I was much more accepted. And I actually started moving towards more of my culture when I came to California, and especially in college. I remember joining a Iranian student group and celebrating the culture there. So there was just a lot more embracing of it. And And I think in general, when we're looking at mental health and the different stages of identity development,
Yeah.
that is one part of it, is where we are trying to figure out who we are and trying to figure out which culture we're trying to assimilate to,
Yeah.
especially children that are of two cultures.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah, and for me, it was, I physically sort of pass as a Caucasian person, and so, it wasn't anything that was like outwardly obvious. But when friends would come over, or I'd be out with like my dad's side of the family, or we would have certain cultural traditions or things that we would do, it always was a little bit awkward. I had to kind of explain things to friends, but thankfully they were always pretty understanding. There was sometimes the weird comments and looks. I think for me, where I experienced some friction was when people would say, "Oh, what's your background?" And I always had to kind of make a choice. Do I want to say Palestine and then get the eyebrow and then get into the whole conversation around the conflict between Israel and Palestine, or be just judged and ignored, or just kind of say, "Oh, I'm Arabic," or "I'm Lebanese or Jordanian," or whatever. And that still is something that I pops into my head today as I even try to explain it. But I think thankfully with just kind of the greater acceptance and understanding of culture and race around the world, that's been something that's more easily identified for myself in public. And then I think the other side of it was, for me, not really knowing how to, feeling kind of like one foot in, one foot out. I am very grateful that I get embraced by my wife's Persian side, which is really fun and very welcoming, and I can really tap into Middle Eastern culture in that way. But at the same time, I physically look Caucasian, and so it's like, if I say to Caucasian groups, I'm half Arabic, or I'm Arabic, or identify with that, kind of raise an eyebrow, and it's like, well, but you're kind of white, and so it's always kind of an awkward place of not really knowing, how to just kind of getting to pick one thing, or do I have to pick one thing, and how that sort of works. So I always feel like I'm having to kind of read a room and read the other person and figure out, what's going to happen there. So that's kind of been my experience growing up and identifying with that.
Yes, you both have said something that that resonates with me. Like you talked about, embracing who you are, your culture, your ethnicity, your background. That helps you with your mental health, as you said earlier. That's really good. And I kind of see what inspires you to do your advocacy job already. And I would love to say thank you so much for the advocacy work that you do together for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also work towards building resilience in children. That's very inspiring. That's very great. I would still love to ask you, like, what inspired you to embark on this mission and projects together as a couple?
Oh, that's a great question. I think honestly, after George Floyd was murdered in the U.S., there was just a lot of movement as a society to be able for many people to want to work together to be able to progress our country and to be able to share the message of racial justice. And Jeff and I were quarantined together. We're married and we're quarantined together. So we're spending a lot of time together and we're having a lot of these discussions, right? A lot of like, what is this future going to look like? What does this look like for our patients? What will this look like one day for our children? So there's so many conversations about what's happening in the US right now. And we wanted to be able to put together materials and in the form of a book to be able to start having the same conversation that we were having in our family room, in our living room, for children to be able to have with their parents outside of this. And so that was really our initiative for starting the book together. But as you can see from our history, very early on, we went to Belgium together. We volunteered in a Red Cross asylum camp and worked with refugees there. So we really just have this passion of wanting to combine social justice, racial justice, the movement towards progressing diversity and equality. And that's a value that we both have shared from the beginning. And I think that's really drawn us together. We've been together for more than a decade now. So it's been a very fun time where we've been able to work on those values together.
Dear friend, you can grow your personal and business brand by creating a strong network through podcasting. Create real human connections, have the ability to share your story and interesting point of view. To get started, you can make use of the special offer for friends of this podcast, which is on kitcaster.com/mirror. kitc.com/mirror. The link and further instruction or details will be found in the show notes for this episode. Thank you. Don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or whatever platform you listen to this on. Thank you. Yes. I see that those are like, wonderful values that you have together that even helps you to build up your relationship together. Like you have core values to help other people, and that helps you also in your marriage to stay together and also work to do great and wonderful things together. And I really appreciate it because you're not like saying, okay, I've finished from college, I'm now working, I can, be comfortable with my life, but you're using what you have, your opportunity to help other people to have better lives also. That's very good. That's impressive. Thank you
That's
so
a
much.
really nice way of putting it. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You can be a therapist too. You said these statements. I'm like, wow, I felt very heard right there.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the principles from our world in therapy that I always kind of come back to when working with individuals or just kind of in my own life is like, relationships are really what create something bigger in our world. And this concept of, it's a German word, Gestalt, which refers to the whole being bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yeah.
And I think as within our marriage, though, we look at like how together can, individually we do a lot of work with a lot of underserved and underrepresented communities, but as we come together, we're able to create things that are even bigger than just ourselves and our marriage, which has been really fun and really fruitful. And we're very grateful to be able to do what we get to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I wish for something like this also for myself.
So you will find it. I know you will.
Yes, hopefully. So talking about working together, I love to talk about your new book called The Proudest Color, which will be released on the 14th of September, 2021. So it's a book that follows the life of a little brown girl called Zara, who sees the world in vivid color. She says, for me, brown is more than feeling proud. It is the color I see when I see me. So who is Zara and what inspired you to write this book?
So Zara is exactly how you said. She's this little girl who sees the world in color, like a box of crayons. And the inspiration for that actually came where for my doctoral program, I had to write an autobiography statement about myself. And I wrote about how sometimes I felt like a box of crayons, or I felt like a color that was in a box of crayons that was not used as often, but when I was used, I would make the page much more brighter, much more colorful. So when George Floyd was murdered, and there was a lot of talk around racial justice, and a lot of children were questioning their skin tone, it reminded me of when I was younger, growing up in Illinois, when I was the only kid in my class that looked different or had a different skin tone than the other students there. And when I was looking through a class photo, you can spot me from a mile, like you can know, there she is, she's right there. And and that says something, right, about for all those eyes are drawn to me, and children are very naturally curious from a very young age. They're asking questions of why does someone look different, or why does someone wear like a scarf on their head? They're wanting to know. And so kids would ask me questions like, oh, your skin is darker than mine, because they hadn't seen anything like that. It wasn't probably in their TV shows. It wasn't people that their parents hung out with. The only time they saw someone that had that skin tone was at school, and that person was me. So Zahra's story is based a little bit off of that. It's based off of Jeff's experience as well, where he grew up also trying to understand his culture and his identity, and trying to find pride and meaning in all of that. So we kind of combine both of our backgrounds together as Middle Easterners, especially growing up in a post 9/11 world where our culture and our identity was questioned. And we pulled together materials that from research. Really, that's a big emphasis that Jeff and I have, is that if we're going to teach children a method of being able to cope with discrimination or understand discrimination, we want it to be based in literature, in evidence-based studies. So what we did pull from was Dr. Hughes's racial socialization theory, which we can definitely talk about as well, and how how if you teach a child to be proud about of their culture and of people that look like them,
Mm.
then that could be a method of combating the negative impact of discrimination. So
Mm.
I could definitely unpack that. It's a lot to unpack, but that's a little
Yes.
bit where the inspiration came from.
And I want to just kind of even back up and acknowledge too, just to kind of add to what Sheila was saying, was that a lot of immigrants as well to America, and maybe this is your experience as well abroad, is usually the first generation tries to assimilate to the dominant culture, right? And
Mm.
don't be so cultural out in public, and don't that happens in the home, but try to assimilate as much as possible and kind of whitewash yourself in a way. And so this book kind of takes a different angle of let's actually let's cope with discrimination by actually creating pride in oneself and in one's culture and ethnicity, by recognizing those who are similar color or skin tone who are doing great things. And the other one of the reasons we wanted to write this book was we recognized that there was a need for to write a book that could reach as many brown kids or people of color as possible,
Mm.
and we hadn't quite seen anything like that on the shelf that was also based in sound research. So some of the things we wanted to really convey to parents was to first just kind of check in with yourself, right? We know how much children pick up on even just the attitude of a parent as they walk into a room.
Mm.
Little kids are very perceptive and they don't quite know how to separate the parents' feelings from their own sometimes. So it's really helpful for a parent to check in with themselves, notice what they're even feeling as they kind of approach a topic like this. It can be very difficult, very emotional, very frustrating, very just sad sometimes to kind of approach. So it doesn't mean not to have those feelings. It's just to acknowledge them for yourself so that you can experience them authentically with your child.
Yeah.
If you don't acknowledge, let me put it in a positive way, the more that a parent can acknowledge emotions in a healthy way and express them in a healthy way, kids will understand that and not then grow up feeling kind of confused about like, why do I feel maybe frustrated or like an outcast every time I go out in public. The
Mm.
parent can really highlight that for them.
Yeah.
We also encourage parents to ask open-ended questions. So if any parents of teens know, if you just ask, how was your day? You're gonna get, it was fine. Kind of that grocery store response that you give to the checkout clerk.
Yeah.
But open-ended questions allow for more fruitful conversation. So tell me about what that was like, for example, or how
Mm.
did you respond when this happened?
Mm.
What were you thinking when you saw this? And
Mm.
it just helps, develop that language around it. And like I said earlier, when it comes to the importance of relationships, you deepen that trust and that openness in a relationship with a child.
I think another thing is that when you're having this conversation with your child, especially around the age of Zahra, she's very concrete thinking. So it's
Mm.
important to even phrase the conversation of race and racism around what's fair and unfair, because
Mm.
children around that age understand what's fair and unfair, right? Like
Yes.
if you give the example I always give parents is like if you give the brother two cookies and you give the sister one cookie,
Mm.
they will understand that there's a discrepancy. So you could use that as a way of being able to launch of how certain groups in our community are not receiving as much as other groups or are not being able to get their needs met like other groups. And what is that like? And have you seen that happen at school or has that
Mm.
happened to you? So really being inquisitive about a child's experience and very being concrete because developmentally they do understand things in that sense.
Mm.
That's important. The little bit more deeper questions like Jeff was talking about, that's great for adolescents when they get older, having a lot more of those in-depth conversations. So
Yeah.
um, there's also being able to read children's books to kids. So I think
Mm.
that's huge.
Yeah.
Children project themselves onto the character, right? So they'll
Mm.
see someone like Zahra or they'll see another character and wonder about themselves or think that the experience is similar for themselves. So parents could use that as a launching point of deeper discussions of like, oh, what did you think Zahra felt, or
Mm.
how was that when Zahra went into the school and nobody was no one really looked at her the same way or looked at her skin tone. Has that ever happened to you? So you could use that as a vessel.
Yes.
There's I also love Crayola's different skin tone crayons and
Mm.
markers. I
Mm.
think that's really an important tool to have for children when they're using crayons because not having a color that represents your skin tone is just so when you're drawing yourself or you're
Yeah.
drawing your family. That's
Yes.
huge for a child, right? Because
Mm.
a lot of their world is expressed through art and drawings. So investing in tools like children's books and Crayolas like crayons that have the skin tone representation is also really important. There's
Yeah.
just so many other ones. I mean, I think modulating media. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, in terms of just kind of the concept of like modulating media too, it's not that we don't want to encourage parents to like completely shield their children from what's happening in the world, right? We want children to grow up having an honest and authentic experience of what's happening in the world, but that doesn't mean they need to watch some of those videos of police brutality, for example, or people being, experiencing violence or upfront discrimination, because that can be kind of overwhelming to children, right? So are there other ways that parents should explore? Are there other ways to convey what happened or tell the story of what happened or pick certain scenes even? So really just being mindful of, can you get the point across? Can you convey that or have that fruitful conversation with your child without necessarily having to expose them to something that their brain might not be ready to see yet? I mean, even for myself as an adult and as a therapist, seeing, the video of George Floyd's murder, it was overwhelming for me and is very much seared into my mind. And while it was important for me to see that and understand, how severe and impactful that situation was, I can't imagine having a young child see that. I think there's just many other ways to explain what happened to George Floyd or to others. And there are actually been books written about how I think there's a book called What Something Happened in Our Neighborhood or Something Happened Today, a children's book specifically about how to explain police brutality to children. So that's another suggestion that we have for parents.
Yes, and I think you guys did a wonderful job with the book already, because I was going through the preview and I saw that it's like a beautiful illustration book with so much colors. I mean, that will attract a child to actually pick it up and read it. But is it also suitable for for parents or for people that are looking forward to having kids later in the future? Or who is it primarily for? Is it just for the kids or also for parents with the kids together?
That's a great question. I think that, first of all, our illustrator, Monica, did such an amazing job. I mean, the illustrations are stunning. You're right.
Yes.
It's so colorful. It's so colorful. And I think that although this book was written for children, I think that there's still a lot of power and meaning. So we do have a lot of friends that are purchasing it for themselves. So they are very excited to have a book that represents them, right? So as Zahra thinks about who does she look like, her family reminds her, here are all these great people that share your skin tone, who have done amazing things. So if someone at school tells you that they don't like your color of your skin, remember that, Frida Kahlo, Martin Luther King Jr., Barack Obama, our vice president in the US, Kamala Harris is, they're all share your skin tone. And so she can think, oh, these are these amazing people that have gone on and done incredible things. And I'm also an important person and I will one day do an incredible thing. And I think as a kid hearing that message, that's powerful, but also as a teen or an adult, I think that's an important message too. So I think it depends. If you are a collector of children's books and you like it, by all means, I think that would be a great resource for you.
Even if you just love great art, Monica just did such a great job telling a story and bringing it to life, even with some touches of humor. You'll have to wait to see when it comes out, but it's very clever. And those who were involved with the development of the book after we wrote it, getting it to the physical thing, even conveyed to us, if they were individuals of background of color, conveyed how much it kind of helped them even realize, like, oh, growing up, like my mom's skin tone was lighter than mine, and people always question, was she even my mom? And so this book kind of helped them recognize an experience that they had looking backwards, and then how they can kind of feel proud about their skin tone as a result. So I would say, it's not going to, I would encourage adults to buy it and just for the art and for the experience and just as a way to hold on to and recommend to other friends and families too.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the book. I'm going to put the link to your website for the book in the show notes for this episode. But the book is going to be available on Amazon and other book outlets from the 14th of September 2021. So I will encourage everyone to pick it up. For people like me who love to read books with illustrations also, please pick it up too.
Thank you.
That was so awesome. Yes. So please, can you talk to me about the impact of racial trauma on our mental health? I know both of you are experts in mental health. What's the impact of racial trauma on our mental health, and how can we develop resilience against it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that so part of my dissertation research was actually studying the impact of discrimination on the Middle Eastern American community. And in order for me to study the Middle Eastern community, I had to look at research across all the different communities as well, because
Mm,
um, for the Middle Eastern community, there's not a lot of research. So I needed to pull from other communities, understand their experience. And one of the things that really came out of it is that we know that there's very clear cut research that discrimination impacts mental health, has led to depression, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder,
mm,
and really has people questioning their self-esteem and feeling like they've lost control and power when they've experienced discrimination.
mm,
So we do know that is a line that has been correlated. And so the next step is, now that we know that it causes that level of trauma within us,
mm,
what do we do about it? And so that's really where the work is in trying to build the resilience. One of the ways of building resilience is something called racial socialization. So racial socialization is the message that we use in our book. It has different components to it. So with Dr. Hughes's research, one component was helping, which we had written about, is called cultural socialization, which is instilling cultural pride in a child, reminding them of traditions, of important people in their culture, of people that share their skin tone and have gone on and done important things.
mm,
That has been helpful. Because all of a sudden, when you experience discrimination and someone says, I don't like your skin tone, you can say, well, you know, Barack Obama was president.
mm.
And he looks like me. So, and you can use that as a buffer for yourself. You can talk to yourself and say, hey, like, these are these important people that I can carry in my heart that have done
Yes.
really great things. So
Mm,
that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is preparation for bias. So that means that having the honest conversation that I know that a lot of Black families in the U.S. have had to have with their children about, this might happen to you just because of your skin color. You might
mm,
get pulled over by a cop, or you might experience something at a store, or whatever the case might be for you.
yeah.
So having those conversations, although initially the research has found could have a child question, their background,
Mm,
being able to do it in a way that is informative,
mm,
and you're trying to instill safety in a child, because
mm,
there's a reality in the world that you cannot always protect them from.
yeah.
And then also instilling the cultural pride,
Mm,
that can also have positive results on their mental health.
mm,
Um, the third thing that they have found in the research is promotion of mistrust. And that means if you tell children at a young age, don't trust this group, don't trust that group, because this is what they're going to do to you, that actually is a negative impact on mental health. That
mm,
doesn't serve as a buffer for the child, because now the child is going out into the world questioning all their social interactions
mm,
and all the people that they come across based
mm,
off of the messages that were communicated.
mm,
So ultimately, if we look at all of these different modes, these are all three modes of communication to a child. It's up to a parent to decide which road they want to take and how they want to take it, and what tools they want to use to communicate messages of race and racism.
mm,
And through the way that you communicate, you build your child's resilience. And
yes.
that's one big component that we talk about, and that we're hoping that the book could be. Because when I was looking at my patient, when we were both looking at our patients, I was like, man, I wish I really had a book that could remind them
Mm,
how important they are. And I
mm,
just remember there's all these pictures online of kids pressing their hands against the TV screen when Barack Obama was being sworn in. I think I
yes.
was doing it too. It was it was such an impactful moment where
Yes.
I remember during those 8 years, I would walk around being like, I have a president that looks like me.
Mm,
I have a president that knows my culture, that understands me.
mm,
And I think that that's what I want. We both wanted in our book, was like, we wanted to be able to have a place in the book where a kid could say, oh yeah, there you go. Like, there's the people that look like me and they're really important. And that builds that resilience against stress and negativity.
yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I would also just kind of add to what you're saying is that, to your earlier question of like, what's the impact on mental health? It's we see that increase of mental health symptoms like depression and anxiety and trauma, but then there's the impact that has on one's day-to-day life. And Sheila's research specifically was on college students. And so, that racial discrimination, that racial trauma led to students questioning whether they could stay in school or not doing as well in their classes as they normally would. We also have the flip side of the kind of model minority discrimination, where it's like you're expected to be perfect, right? A lot of the times the Asian community experiences that, where that can lead to a lot of stress and a lot of burnout and a feeling of needing to be perfect and what happens if you're not. So you have, kids not, adjusting to college very easily, not, feeling isolated, dropping out. We see it in the workplace a lot. We've known that for a long time. And so, even what we just watched in the Heights last night. Yeah, the Lin-Manuel Miranda film or a musical, and we won't spoil it too much. It happens fairly early on, but one of the main characters decides, is kind of questioning her if she can actually maintain at Stanford University, coming from Washington Heights in New York, and
after experiencing a lot of discrimination at Stanford and being questioning her place in it and her role. So I think that it was an accurate description of like the stress of discrimination carries on multiple levels for you individually, within your community, within society, and has a rippling effect because you're constantly questioning your sense of belonging. And when our sense of belonging is challenged, that is really one of the main things that leads to mental health symptoms.
Toby, I'm curious. I mean, if it's okay to ask you,
Yes.
Being in Germany, I mean, what's your experience been like? I don't know if you've had any sort of questions or thoughts for yourself or experiences that are relevant to this.
Yeah. So for me personally, I've been blessed not to, have any racial issue with the Germans, but I have friends, I have, close people, colleagues that have really experienced, racial issues, like being insulted or being maltreated because of this color of their skin, because of their, where they come from. Yeah. Yes, so it has always been like for me, it's always been a burden, like, stepping out every day out of my comfort zone, out of my apartment, going out into the world, like, oh my God, let today just be a wonderful day in which I'm not, confronted because of my skin color or because of of where I come from, actually. But yeah, it has always been that every day, preparation, mental preparation that today anything might happen, but I'll be ready for it. I'll let it go with grace and poise.
That takes that's a toll that it takes on the body every single day, right?
Yes.
That others don't have to worry about. I mean, those who don't have to think about that can just walk out the door and go about their day. It's just closing the doors is a thing you don't even have to think about.
Exactly. Yes.
But I'm glad to hear that you haven't had any direct experiences of it.
Wow, you made it to the very end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm grateful for your time, your love, and your contributions. Subscribe, like, review, and share this podcast. God bless you. Bye.